We are live here on Plus One EXP's Roll for Content channel. My name is Tony Vicenda. I am Chief Alchemist here at Plus One EXP, which is a weird little brand that's passionate about helping amazing designers connect with great gamers, or great players who can love their games, and amazing players connect with great designers whose games they can love. We do that in a lot of different ways, but once a month we sit down with two creators for a three-way interview about their games where they can interrogate and appreciate each other's works. Today, that is exactly what we are doing. We are sitting down with Michael, Drew, Massotto, and Zoheb Mashiur to talk about, let's say, cursed cowboys and the cost of change, and how those two things might interface with each other or not. I love getting to sit down and do this kind of unique interview format, and it's really great to see the moments of resonance and difference that we see in the conversations that come up as people look at each other's works. Uh, Folks, super glad to have you on stream. Let's have you all introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and a little bit about the game that you created that the other person's going to be interviewing you about. Zoheb, let's start with you. If you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and about Midnight in a Perfect World.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm a Bangladeshi national, but I've been living in various countries in Europe for the past few years, pursuing academia, chasing after it, as it were. I'm currently a postdoc in a tiny little town in the Arctic Circle, where the sun is, I think, on the 21st, about to go out. Is it? Yeah, on the 21st, it's about to go out for several months. So there's that to look forward to. I'm an academic, as I said, getting into game studies, particularly looking at tabletop role-playing games as my specific niche in there. So very much interested. However, I've only been playing games since the pandemic, pretty seriously. And I got into design pretty early, mostly through narrative systems. And I've been workshopping something that would eventually be called Midnight in a Perfect World for quite a long time. I ended up making it for this Games for Palestine bundle. One of those, I forget exactly what it was called. And just made it in February 2024. Yeah, put it out there. Got Wes from Plus One XP was posting up about the Zine Club. I submitted the game to them, and then yeah, the rest is kind of history, I guess. As to what the game itself is, it's kind of like, it's a bit like a dinner LARP, I guess, like a parlor LARP, crossed with a very rules-light TTRPG that deals with the aftermath of a revolution in a country, a national revolution. And the players are people who survived it, and then they kind of are marking the anniversary of the revolution through a dinner party, counting down to the midnight where the actual anniversary itself is going to be celebrated with everyone else. And they're thinking about all the people who did not survive to celebrate it with them. And yeah, their complicated relationship to themselves, those ghosts, and the nation at large.
Awesome.
Yeah, happy to be here.
It was one of the titles I was most excited for us to get out for a lot of reasons, and we did take it to I think its first convention since release. This at Metatopia. Metatopia is not a big sales convention. It is, if you sell 3 of something, you've sold a whole lot of that game. And we took 5 copies and sold out. So like people were really interested in the theme. I also know we've had great conversations with teachers in the classroom who are interested in exploring this theme with students also too, when we've taken it to street fairs and been talking to folks. So the themes that you're hitting, I think, are especially resonant in so many parts of the world right now. Midnight Perfect World. So I'm really excited to sit down, hear more of your thoughts about it, hear what Michael thought about it, and dive in a little bit deeper. So I also know that you and I are going to sit down with some other people and get a chance to play in December too. So I'm really looking forward to that as well. So Michael, same question. Tell us a little bit about who you are and a little bit about the game that we're going to be discussing.
Sure. So to everyone watching, hi, I'm Mike. I am a recent graduate from a tech university in New Jersey in the U.S. I always wanted to get into game design. I originally sought out for video game design, but I've kind of found my home in tabletop game design, thinking about maybe branching out in the board game design in the future. I've made games, but none published up until very recently. It was I believe now a year ago, where I brought a really unique like card conflict resolution system over to the +1 booth, and I was like, hey, I don't know how to get into the TTRPG field. What do you guys think of this? And our friend Wes was told us or told me that hey, give me your contact information. This is really cool. So now I'm here. The game that I made is called Twilight Country. It's a spaghetti western fused with pulp horror RPG that uses a playing card system instead of dice. The playing card system is inspired from blackjack, and it has a lot of heavy themes on things like the ugly parts of humanity and how we should still cherish those, and the like the flaws that make us human. Um, and also I try to like use it as an exercise to get myself into like critically analyzing the themes that correlate between both westerns and horror, because there's surprisingly a lot of overlap. And westerns are still a pretty niche genre, so a lot of people aren't super familiar with the tropes that those two genres share.
I'm super excited to dive in. Also, you were one of Wes's like first titles to bring in for Zine Club, even though it's been development for a long time. Both games came in at very different points. One was a rough idea, like still very much in development. The other one was a really polished game that we did some new layout on and gave it a kind of fresh look and helped a little bit with. But it's great to kind of sit down and talk about this. I also feel like these are two games that I am always interested in what emerges from the conversation with the designers. I think lots of times the games feel like they have very similar emotional weight. I think this is the first time where I sat down and been like, I'm really interested to see how some of the different emotional weight, some of those different elements, some of those different themes might connect with each other or not. So really excited to kind of dive in. Usually I kind of have a very light, like, hey, here's a top level question to kind of bring them together. But because of all the stress of this week, I didn't prep one well enough in advance that I feel really comfortable just tossing out. So I think, Mike, let's just start with you and kick straight into the interview portion of things. So each of you has been able to prep a set of questions for the other person based on the work, had some time to kind of go through it and come in and ask those questions. But let's start with your first conversation, for your first question for Zoheb, and then we'll kind of continue the conversation going back and forth.
Sure. And yeah, first I want to say, Zoheb, I was really impressed with Midnight in a Perfect World because I am a very I like a lot of rules light stuff. I come from the camp of the game should help you tell a story, and if it doesn't tell a story, it doesn't help you tell a story, it gets in the way of it. That mechanic shouldn't exist. So I was very impressed with the fact that the game is this thin and still says so much. Especially with like very few mechanics and with a basically just a very interesting narrative structure. But the first question that I have for you, you kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, because the game was in a bundle for Games for Palestine. But I want to know like what historical struggles inspired you the most for making Midnight in a Perfect World, and like where you think those historical struggles manifest the most in the text. Because I could get an idea of like some of like the themes, like historical themes that shine through in Midnight in a Perfect World, but I want to hear from you what inspired you and where in the book you can point to and say like, I got it from this.
Hmm. Yeah, no, thank you a lot. Thank you, Mike. I think the easy answer, which may not be the total answer, but is probably something that has to be brought up. So I'm Bangladeshi. Bangladesh is a country that's younger than my parents. Like many countries in the world, many post-colonial states. Yeah, and I didn't live through the War of Independence that brought the country to being, but I grew up in the country that happened afterwards. Like, was born in '92, so that's shortly after the fall of a particular dictatorship in our country and the return of democracy, such as it was. And I was old enough, around, when was it? I think I was 16 or so when we elected a government that stayed in power until last year, with a sort of essentially a dictatorship that was basically unofficial. I won't go into unpacking Bangladeshi history now. That's too complicated and in many ways kind of beyond me. That's also part of it, the undecidability of history. So yeah, I think the coincidence of the game is that I wrote it in February 2024. February, yeah, I think so. For this Palestine bundle. Reached out to Wes around the summer. And I think like 2 months after I'd spoken to Wes, maybe the month afterwards, back home, the government fell in a popular revolution. So essentially the game, I suppose, was kind of like about me thinking about this revolution, this war of independence that happened for my parents and my grandfather, my grandparents. And this sort of like how I was born right after the fall of a dictatorship afterwards as well, and then kind of like living through the fact that I grew up in this state where things could not be imagined to ever be improving. And then coincidentally, strangely enough, that world just vanished and we're about to have elections again. I've never voted in my life. I've never had the opportunity to do so. And of course, I've also been living as an immigrant for a while, so not been able to participate in democracy as an immigrant. So there's a lot of like those feelings and that sort of like historical particularity that kind of like goes into that. But beyond that, there's just this constant fascination I have with the cost of war and like the life that goes on afterwards, like how we memorialize things, how we understand memories of tragedies and so on, wars, genocides, other kinds of atrocities. Disco Elysium plays a huge role, the video game, in my sort of thought process as like a title that for the first time, even though it was about like created by post-communist Estonians and like set in a fictional world. I played that. I was like, this is the first game that I feel like really gets it, in a way. And I happened to play that while I was living in Prague, and that was also really interesting because like there was a lot of like post-communist trauma there. That's really interesting as someone I would describe myself as a sort of socialist. So living in a country that had lived through actual communism and where the legacy of communism was constantly being sort of like renegotiated, and there was a lot of like genuine trauma after the rule of communism. Kind of like also didn't like dissuade me from my politics either, but kind of like made me aware of the complications and the real world histories that have to be confronted in my own personal politics. And yeah, I think like in many ways, like I think what ended up being the case is that when I thought about a game that kind of explores all this, I wanted to just put people in a situation where you just play people who lived through politics and they're still alive, and then what the actual politics and so on of that is something you have to invent and kind of like work through yourself. Kind of like a rambly answer, but I hope that got to where you were wanting to go.
Yeah, that was first of all fascinating and an amazing perspective. Here in the U.S., we don't really have that history. It in a lot of ways in the U.S. it's kind of just it's kind of treated like the history is a distant thing where you're not expected to, even though it's not true. We're expected to treat the atrocities of the past as singular incidents that don't inform our current like political landscape. So I really appreciate that that the game comes from a perspective where we're acknowledging the fact that history is real, it's still alive, it's happening today. So thank you for sharing it. That holds a lot of weight.
Zoheb, it's your turn to ask a question.
Yeah. I do not, unfortunately, have my own print copy of Twilight Country to hold up. U.S. shipping is pretty difficult in Norway.
We can get you one. Did we send you physical copies of your game?
Yeah. Oh, shit, I could have asked.
Yeah, we usually try to include the other thing for that month. Just ping me a message later and I'll get you a copy.
All right, cool. Yeah, it'd be nice to have a physical copy. But still, 44 pages is pretty tight. It's a pretty tight design, so congratulations on that. And what I really liked is that reading through it, like the first thing that you get is this really beautifully written sort of like prose exploration of the West and kind of like undoing its mythology by centering minorities at the very beginning. And then we start to get to what ends up being a relatively, for its size and for like the sort of like one-shot vibe that I imagine it's actually for, a relatively crunchy card-based sort of system that, you know, puts itself forward through its fiction first, and then you kind of like get into like fairly interesting mechanics. So that was actually really like well done in terms of like condensing all of it, and I think you can see it in the layout. It's very efficient. So I'm just gassing you up at first with a lot of stuff that I really liked. But the actual question that I want to ask is, yeah, I think like a tough one, I think, potentially, because it starts off with, because you start off with the minority histories, the indigenous, the Black Americans, and all these other groups that are not usually seen. They're kind of like what's the word? Not the forgotten history, but like, you know, papered over in like the big glossy sort of like a Wild West sort of image, right, of the cowboy and all that. But this the real history that was already there, and in many ways not just peripheral but central to the story, which I think like becomes really interesting in the context of Twilight Country being a game about people going through essentially their own personal hell, right? It's a horror game, so I think it's really interesting because essentially, like if we are reminded at the start of the minorities, the indigenous, the Black Americans, and all these other people, and then we have a game where we are asked to imagine the people in the West going through Twilight Country and kind of like meeting a horrible end, then I would imagine that I'm primed to imagine minority characters. In fact, I probably should. I shouldn't commit some erasure there by making like white cowboys and so on and putting them through like the ringer. But then it becomes like this, not an ambivalent thing, but like a sort of like really interesting situation where you are always like thinking about these minorities, and then you kind of like put them in the position of kind of like going through this difficult situation that is the game. So kind of like, I guess my question is like, how do you kind of like square that of like remembering the minority history and not kind of like shying away from that, while at the same time playing a game where the characters that you're thinking about in the West are the ones going through these difficulties? So even if you aren't playing minorities, even if you're playing like white cowboys and so on, like how do we like manage that? Does that make sense of the question?
Yeah, it makes sense. I honestly, I found when making the game that I was a little bit worried approaching this exact issue, because I was like, okay, this is a game where the characters are going into a kind of like another realm, and they're basically meeting a cruel, tormenting experience or end, right? And I was like, does that immediately come at odds with the idea that we're focusing on the minority groups that are traveling out to this space? And at least from my perspective, the answer is no, because this isn't supposed to be a punishment. It's not punishment, it's just happenstance. People didn't go to the Wild West to punish themselves. They went to the Wild West because they were tricked into believing there would be opportunity for them. Or there was opportunity for them, and it was at the expense of indigenous people there. So the setting of Twilight Country is to say a place like this that is marketed as paradise, as a new start, as an opportunity, is seldom what it seems to be for anyone. It doesn't matter what minority, what sexual orientation you are, what background you are, or what your class is. If you are looking for opportunity out there, only the most wretched people will succeed from that kind of opportunity, because those wretched people are the people willing to do systemically horrible things. So Twilight Country is sort of like at least in my perspective, was a manifestation of what the West must have been like for a lot of working class people of various walks of life, being told, "Oh, this is opportunity," but it's not really opportunity for you. And then I wanted to also throw in a lot of pulp horror monsters into that setting, because a lot of pulp horror monsters are analogies for how people approach things like colonialism or racism or class divides. And I felt like that the pulp horror creatures in the pulp horror setting is a good way to put that psychological tension front and center. Yeah.
So I guess
that's kind of how I squared it.
Yeah, so I guess like what I'm understanding and what should have been obvious to me, but it's nice to hear you confirm it, is that Twilight Country explicitly says that you're not in the West, you're in Twilight Country. But that's actually a trick from what I can understand, because essentially Twilight Country is the West. You're not actually going anywhere else. You're, by using the metaphor of going to a worse kind of place, in fact, you're just reliving the actual realities of how hard the West actually was, particularly for minorities.
Yes. Yeah, that's kind of what I was kind of going for, is the idea that like the West was an unfamiliar and scary place for everyone involved, because either it was indigenous people who were having new forces invade into their homeland and make it a place alien to them, or it was people who were barely scraping by going over to a alien place because they were told there's an opportunity there. Like the first ever playtest session that I did for my game, the whole premise is you are a bunch of characters who are on a train. Other people sent out letters to these people for job opportunities. So they all get on the train. They're all going down the train, and things get increasingly more and more suspicious as they're on the train. And it gets to the point where there's monster hijinks, there's like a semi-action scene where they're trying to get to the front of the train, and they get to the front of the train and they can see this town of Machine on the horizon. And the town of Machine on the horizon is a giant incinerator. It's not a town.
Yeah.
And I think that playtest session was a really good like encapsulation of what I want Twilight Country to be. It's horror and cowboys and hijinks, but it's also supposed to be a larger than life telling of what people had to go through, the figurative incinerator they had to go through when they went to the West.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I appreciate that. I have lots of questions, but I'm also aware that Tony hasn't spoken in a while.
It's fine. This is the best part for me. Like, I'll hop in if the conversation like dips down. But right. It was like for the most part, this is time that we want you all to be able to like look through things, like ask your questions, and be able to kind of talk to each other about things. So I will not hesitate to throw something in if I have a question or a follow-up, or if the conversation dwindles a little bit. But I get to ask the 3 questions at the end also too. So that's kind of right. my chance to dive in. Y'all's time.
Right. Cool.
So Mike, go ahead and
for a minute, we're gonna step a little bit away from the really heavy parts of our game, because I have a mechanics question that I'm very interested in. And the question is, what led you to decide to use a live timer throughout a session of Midnight in a Perfect World? Because that's really cool to me, and the only other game I've seen do that I know of personally is Alice is Missing. And it struck me as like, oh, that's a really obvious choice for a dinner party setting. But I want to know why you chose it, because I'm sure there's more insight to it than just it's a dinner party setting, there should be a live timer.
All right. Yeah. So the historical thing that kind of underlies it is that I forget exactly which date it is, but India achieved independence in 1947. So I'm Bangladeshi. I'm not actually Indian, but like I was. It was India and Pakistan, so technically that was also Independence Day for Pakistan, which part of it became Bangladesh, etc. The interesting thing is that it achieved it achieved a freedom at midnight, and there's a famous book called Freedom at Midnight that kind of like goes through that process. India has a time zone that's GMT 5 plus 5.5, so 5 hours 30 minutes. Pakistan has a GMT of 5. I think that's correct. Yes. So there's this bizarre situation that happened where freedom at midnight meant India got freedom at midnight, but Pakistan got freedom at the same time. So actually, their Independence Day is the day before because it was half an hour before. So you got this like bizarre sort of like situation where freedom at midnight, but like not for everyone. Not for one of the countries that got freedom at midnight. So there's that sort of thing that was like in the background. And for a long time, I've been wanting to like write a scene or like something like a short story or a game or something where there was a group of people standing at a plaza, looking at a clock, seeing the countdown go forward, and the fireworks are starting in the background. Kind of like a New Year's Eve sort of vibe, and there's like this elation, but they're always aware as they're looking around. They're just kind of like thinking about like all the things that like all the people who aren't here and all the memories that they have in these streets and so on during the war or whatever, or like before the war. And during the pandemic, I was really trying to make this work through a Twine game. Anna Anthropy has a Twine game called Queers in Love at the End of the World, where I think you have 30 seconds to kind of like, it's you, it's your partner, you're in love, you have 30 seconds together. And it's a brutal 30-second thing, countdown, and you can like kiss, you can talk and so on. And it just world ends in 30 seconds. So there was that in the background, and I was trying to like make that mechanic work for this sort of like system, this Twine game where you're in this plaza. It's got a really short description with like some keywords that you can click. And when you click, the words kind of like balloon out. So it's like, I don't know, I'm standing in the plaza, here's this tree, we're looking at the clock. You click on the word clock, it tells you more about the clock. And then there's something else in there that's nested. So you can click on that. Maybe the clock was built by this architect, right? You click on the architect and it tells you about that architect. And eventually what ends up happening is that you start like ballooning out this story of the place just by standing there. That starts to become so big that you cannot finish reading it in like the, I don't know, 2 minutes or whatever the Twine game was supposed to have that I was making. Like many things that I started to do in the pandemic, I didn't actually end up finishing this. So it kind of like sat in the back burner for a while. But I knew it was going to be called Midnight in a Perfect World because that is I like to title things after music. DJ Shadow's seminal album, Introducing, the first album created entirely from samples, so historically significant, little music nerdery. And I think Midnight in a Perfect World is the final track or close there. Beautiful song. And I knew that I wanted this Twine game to have that as the background music. And then I shelved that idea. And then, yeah, revisited the idea of wanting to write something for this Palestine bundle. As I hinted, Northern Norway is totally dark during the winter. So it was total darkness during which I wrote that, and somehow it all came together. So that's why it has a timer, because of a DJ Shadow song, because of an Anna Anthropy Twine game, and because of India. I happen to have played Alison Missing somewhere in that time, so I will not pretend that that didn't play a part. But I don't think it was a big part of my generative process.
Richard was talking when we were at Metatopia about the elegance of like real world time is time, but also just the underutilization of time as a generalized mechanic in RPG. So we're always deeply delighted whenever we see it pop up as something someone, whether it is representative time or just, hey, this is 1-to-1 for your characters. Like you are on a clock. You need to make choices within the time that you have. Oftentimes it's grounding in a really interesting way, and it was super delightful to see kind of how it popped up in Midnight in a Perfect World also.
Now that you mentioned that, like, I hadn't thought of it explicitly, but time is in fact the resource that you're spending while you're playing a role-playing game anyway. It's like you have to schedule everyone getting together. That's hard. Then you have to pace the scenes. You have to give everyone spotlight. You have to get everything done within a certain time. You don't want things to go on too long. Maybe there isn't like a strict clock that's right there saying we have to be done by I don't know, 3 hours, but sometimes there is, right?
Yeah. So yeah, it's always interesting to see how it influences play. So it was, yeah, like I said, anytime we see it come up as a mechanic in a game, we're as a staff, we're typically secretly like, ooh, like what is this doing and how is it doing? So I love seeing that question pop up also.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that question. Yeah. I have a question for you then on mechanics. I do have like I do want to return to the political stuff as well, but it's good to pace it out with some lighter questions. So I don't play cards. People have attempted to teach me at various times, and I think at this point I have mentally congealed in such a way that cards do not penetrate my brain anymore, which makes me very fun to play cards with because I'm very bad at them. I learn the rules and then I immediately forget. So for me, like when I was looking at Twilight Country and seeing the blackjack rules, for me, I knew I understood that they were probably poker or blackjack, because those are common card games, and I identified them with the West. So I assumed that was a thematic reason for that. So, but the challenge hand, right? This challenge hand mechanic that you have, it's so fascinating to me, because I really like these, what's the word? Non-linear, maybe that's not the right word, but like it's kind of like uncertain and slightly non-linear sort of like difficulty classes for skill checks, where it's not just the GM saying, it sounds like it's maybe a 10, but you got this modifier. So let's say your DC is 12, you give me a 2d6 plus your blah, 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 blah. So that's a more linear thing. But like I like it when there's in these games where the GM doesn't have full control about the difficulty class that they're setting, and the PCs don't really have the wherewithal to really be able to consistently hit that. So Aegon, I think, is, if you played that by John Harper, if you know it.
I haven't actually.
Okay, but like it has a thing where the GM has to roll a bunch of dice to kind of like come up with the difficulty class.
Okay.
It may be high, it may be low. It's a bit of a surprise for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then the players also roll a bunch of traits, and then maybe it's a surprise if they hit it or not. So I like that, but I really find yours really, really compelling, because it's like there's so many like levers in which you can kind of like you have like the various like card values, for example. Some of them are worth 10. There's the face, there's the suit, you have kind of like, if you match the face and the suits, you get a certain value. You can then like, you have like your stats as well. They can like add up to plus 1 or 2 or 3 or something to the value, and all that if you wager a trait. Yeah. So there's like so many ways in which you can influence as the player, trying to hit that target number while you actually don't know what the target number may actually be. Some of the cards might be hidden, and that's very, very fascinating to me. So kudos for that. I definitely want to hear more of your thoughts on how you got there. The other thing I want to ask specifically beyond like how you got there is also for like a one-shot sort of system ish, right? This is a fairly complex mechanic. Like it feels, so I feel like every time there's a challenge hand, it probably takes a little while to resolve, which is cool and exciting, but it also like adds to the time of it. It's not a speedy resolution system at all. So how do you kind of like balance the intricacy versus the need for a fast flowing game with that?
Well, what I noticed is that the majority of the time spent on resolving a challenge hand is entirely from the agony of the player and looking at their hand and being like, what cards do I choose to put down for this challenge hand? Because all you have to do is, if you assume, this happened all the time in playtesting, if you assume that the highest value card a player or the face down cards in the challenge hand can be are 10, you can calculate what the highest number is going to be, assuming you don't have a joker, because the jokers are 13, right? So you can just get the number that's face up, say it's like an 8, and then there's 2 other cards face down. Assume both of them are 10 and be like, okay, I need a 28 or higher to succeed. And if you really need to succeed the hand, you could just do that. You could play the cards from your hand and do it. But there's an understanding. The players know they don't get to refill their hand until they run out of cards. So if they do that, they're basically saying, yes, I can have a 100% chance of succeeding this hand, or like a 98%, because like the Joker, you know, but 98% chance of succeeding this hand. But if I do that, I'm probably going to drop to like a 30% chance of succeeding the next one. And I found that pace to be a lot more compelling for a horror game than just having a flat DC. Because having a flat DC is good for accurately simulating the difficulty of a thing, of an action. But in a horror game or in a horror movie, a character might be able to easily fend off a horde of zombies, but then they trip on a tree root. You know? And it's just because they're focused on other things. The world is random and unfair sometimes, and there's a whole bunch of situations that you don't realize are more chance than not in the real world. And I wanted to have that leverage that kind of feeling, because I don't want the characters to feel like they are powerful, like they can strategize their way out of it. They can strategize. I'll let them strategize their way out of one or two hands, but you're gonna have to fail eventually if this is a horror story. I don't remember the exact page it's in, but in the game it specifically, in Twilight Country specifically says there is no power fantasy here.
Yep.
That's why the DC is hidden. And that's why you refill when you run out of cards. It's because there is no power fantasy here. I don't want you calculating every single hand. I mean, you can, and my players did it all the time, but when they did it with the understanding that if they get 100% success this time, they will probably fail the next one. And it created that back and forth that constantly kept the players on edge, which is the exact kind of suspense and agony I wanted out of a game like this. There's a YouTuber who does video essays, called Jacob Geller. He's pretty popular. He did he does a video on horror games recently where he showcased Amnesia the Bunker. And I am actually, even though I made a horror game, I'm a scaredy cat. The only reason why I got into horror at all is because my girlfriend, who's really into horror, will watch them with me. I can't watch them on my own. With Amnesia the Bunker, in his video essay, he explains how the choice of using a bullet to break open a lock is one less bullet that you can't use to scare off a monster. Not kill, scare off a monster.
Yeah.
And that kind of philosophy really resonated with me. I was like, if games are the medium of choice, then horror games should use choice as a vector of fear, of suspense. And that's why the challenge hand system, the one card is face up, all the others are face down. And you don't get the refill until you run out, because it's all about making the tough choice of when you will use those precious cards and when you're willing for the story for shit to hit the fan, basically. So that's why the challenge hand is set up with a non-specific DC.
Yeah, I like that. Speaking of Jacob Geller, he's got a really good one on Disco Elysium, which I mentioned earlier. It's the game that was very important for me in the Midnight and Perfect World. Disco Elysium and Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. Great essay. But what I find really interesting about your answer there is like thinking through like power fantasy versus being scared and powerless in a horror game. And I find this really interesting because I've spoken to quite a lot of people about, what makes a horror game as a TTRPG. And so many people go for the idea of loss of agency and powerlessness. And I think, there is something there. And you're working with that as well. But what you're saying also is that there's an opportunity to throw your cards forward and like really, really succeed at the start. But then if you do that, then you are essentially using up your resources and then you're kind of boned for the next one, right? And I think that's where a really, really interesting tension emerges. Because I was telling Tony that I've been, just before this interview, I was playing the 2d20 Modifus system for Conan, which is not a horror game, but it has some horror elements. And what I find really interesting there is that it gives you a lot of meta currencies, so you can you can spend those and you can ball out of control. You can feel really good. And then if you do that, you run out of meta currencies, and then the game can actually be really, really punishing if you go on a losing streak and you have wounds, and it becomes really, really hard. And then you can get your ass kicked. And that's not a horror game, but that feels very similar, because I feel like there's such a different feeling that when you have the opportunity to kind of be really, really successful, to kind of overcome challenges, and then the more you do that, the more you realize that you're kind of spelling your own doom, right? Wes from Plus One XP does a lot of work with the Gauntlet, who have the Between and all these other Carl from Brindlewood games that have the same sort of thing. You can just spend your meta currencies and you can kind of overcome obstacles. You can be really, really powerful. And the more you do that, the less resources and opportunity you have to actually do that as you go in, and that becomes really, really tense. So I like this sort of idea of horror that goes beyond the loss of agency, because giving yourself, starting off with a lot of agency, having a lot of power, and thinking, when do I give it up, and what do I lose by giving it up? That seems really fascinating to me.
I will hop in there, because I love that observation, because I also think there's a level at which we're all choosing to sit down and play a game, right? So lots of agency and lots of power. Maybe I'm just not a good enough player. There's a level at which I can always just be I just won't suspend disbelief. I won't lean in to this game in the same way, because I may not want to experience that. But when you have that mode of choice, it allows your brain to engage with the fiction in an entirely different way, to say, I can choose to succeed now, but I am losing something in that process. And it just lets you have that little bit of lean in that I think for me oftentimes tricks my brain. CFB is one of my favorite systems, but it is not only do we get to you have those currencies that you can see whittling down, but they're almost always paired with either a risk or some moment of character introspection to kind of pull you through in a really strong way. Oh my gosh, now there's Gauntlet people in the chat talking about how great they are. Yeah, Signal Station says open table policy means I'm always more powerful than the monster at my table, because you can just get up and be like, oh, I'm done. I don't want to play this anymore. Whereas play that actually pulls you through, I think, is folks. If y'all have questions also too, feel free to toss them out. We'll probably have time for one more each. I think that was actually let's. I think, do we start with Mike? I guess I don't even know where we're at. Who? Yeah, one more question each, I guess. Let's go there, and then we'll do the final three.
Yeah. Your turn to ask a question.
Okay, cool. But yeah, thank you for asking about the challenge hand system. That one, I was very proud of that. I still think can be improved on, but I was very proud of it.
I loved, as we were sitting at the print, Mike being like, I think I might want to change the entire thing. And I was like, that's what second editions are for, baby.
Yep.
Don't worry about it right now.
Yeah. So let's see. So we're only can choose. I have to choose which question I want to say, because we only have time for one each, right?
Look at me using time as a mechanic to make you.
Using time as a mechanic,
make you experience fear right now about asking the right question or not.
See, this is the choice paralysis I was talking about. Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Yeah. So, I have one, the other two questions I think I can ask you outside the stream, because they're pretty straightforward. But this one I want to explore more, because it's a term I had never heard of until you read your game, and I think that the people in the chat listening would be interested in hearing about this perspective. What is magical realism, and how does it tie into your vision of how the player should interact with your game, Midnight in a Perfect World? Because I'd never heard of magic realism before. I looked it up and I was like, this is interesting, but I'm not totally sure of how it directly relates to what you want people to be doing with your game. So I want to hear it from you. What is it to you, and how does it tie into your game?
Okay. So I'm not a literary scholar. I've worn a lot of hats. I've dabbled in literature, So my definition of magic realism may not satisfy people who actually know what they're talking about. But magic realism is a literary genre that it's not fantasy, because fantasy is a mode where things are not as they are, right? Perhaps we're in a different world entirely, like the Middle Earth, right? Or we're in urban fantasy where there's vampires and werewolves and so on, or Harry Potter and so on. The title that should not be named, but that sort of vibe. Like it's a different world entirely, right? Magic realism is a genre where things are realistic, except there's something that intrudes in the plot that kind of like breaks the normal bounds of reality. I know that it's largely a Latin American genre, and I have not read enough of that. This may not also be a correct description of this book, but Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, I think, yeah, where I believe the premise is that there's a town that's been isolated for 100 years. As I understand it, the reasons it's isolated are not necessarily clear or sensible, but they just are. So that's another way. Like it's a very subtle sort of thing where essentially there's this magical intervention upon the world where rules are suspended, but everything else is kind of still as it normally is. And it's not like some fantasy or science fiction where something new happens in the world and then like you build like infrastructure around it. It's a new fact of life. It's just something that happened. People don't interact with it as such. It's a magical sort of thing that exists. It's magic. It is magic, right? It's inexplicable. It's also quite a thing in South Asian literature, especially in English language stuff. I referenced the Midnight Declaration of Independence for India. So Salman Rushdie, the British, is he actually British? He's South Asian and lives in Britain. I don't actually know his nationality and so on. Famous writer, famous Indian South Asian writer, wrote Midnight's Children, which is essentially a magic realist book about what if at that moment in midnight, a bunch of people across India, Pakistan, Bangladesh later, just developed magical powers. So that's the sort of thing that for me magic realism is. Like you have reality and something happens. The way it actually relates to Midnight in a Perfect World is that Midnight in a Perfect World doesn't necessarily come with a setting. You just have like certain facts about it. Like there was a revolution. There's been a certain number of years. There's a date on midnight people celebrate, right? And there's these dead people, these ghosts as the game calls them. But that's mostly a term. They are not literally ghosts. But at the very end of the game, once midnight happens and then time is suspended, there's a mechanic where you kind of turn around and rather than address the player that you've been talking to for all this time, player character, you address the ghost, the person that you both lost. And that ghost can potentially reply. And because the game is not necessarily set in a fantasy setting, might be, it's not necessarily set in a science fiction setting or something, that it might be, it could be set in reality. Where are these ghosts coming from? What are you actually addressing? Is this a metaphor? Is this actually happening? So that's for me is what magic realism kind of applies in this game. There's this moment where normal reality is suspended in some fashion. Something that was not possible suddenly becomes possible. There may just be a metaphor, may or may not be. And that sort of like undecidability, that sort of like vagueness, that is where magic realism for me kind of kicks in. Again, I'm not a literary scholar, so this might just be me attempting to use a genre term that I think sort of gets there, but may not satisfy people who actually know what they're talking about.
Yeah, I think while there's always more nuance, I think you hit it pretty square on, but also like just the reality of like the goal here is not to be like, oh my gosh, what are these ghosts? Like, why are they like that is not the intent. The intent is to accept and interact with the reality of address this person as if it is a like moment in but I also think even within that, the opening up of like magical realism within the space allows you to think about. I think it creates the ability to establish distance between maybe your real world circumstances and the world you want to play in, along with establishing elements in play that are not going to distract from the core part of the game, but can be fantastic depending on or even beyond that. But I love the like I had missed that in my read through, honestly. But I love that as a reflection on that interaction with the ghost as that beat. This is happening and we are all engaged way
Hmm.
without question. I think framing it that way.
Hmm.
Also, according to Signal Station, born in India and became a UK citizen for
Okay.
Salman Rushdie.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting because like I've never heard of the term, and it shows because it's not really I guess it's not like a very prevalent way to approach fiction um in our like current like mainstream, but it lends itself very well to the setting, or rather lack of setting, but the setup that we have in Midnight in a Perfect World, because it's all about history and your connections and the connections that you lost, and having the ghosts um come alive without coming alive uh is very magical realist, and from how you described it. And I think it's a really important term for people to understand when going into your game, because I feel like someone unexperienced with the term might go into the game and do do have that pitfall of whoa, look at all these ghosts and stuff, but that's not what it's about. It's about the memories that those ghosts represent. It's about the history they represent and the loss that is experienced in their absence. So thank you for explaining that to me and to chat. That's very cool.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, I understand it can be a stumbling block. It's not. I don't really necessarily like putting some things in there that like people don't get, being gatekeepy or anything like that. As such, um, yeah, sometimes I guess like there's like limits of communication, something that's like obvious to me or like something I want to express that may not necessarily hit. So apologies to anyone that it might have been a little bit of a stumbling block for, but I hope it won't have been a big deal. And yeah, nice to be able to explain. I have a question that actually ties into what your question ended up being about, which is literature. Which is yours is a very writerly style. Like you've got a prose style going, and I really like that. There's a lot of beautiful language, like even from the very beginning, like all of them rattle around in the dusty old jar called the American West, dusty old jar, like something about that, like um, so it's a very writerly style that you have. So I want to ask two questions within that. One's a bit about like writing philosophy in terms of RPGs, and the other one's a bit more open-ended, a bit more fun. So I'll ask the tough one first. But I'll ask both, and you can answer them in sequence. So I tend to really like writerly styles in RPGs. I tend to like reading TTRPG books for pleasure. And I think there's also there can be a somewhat of a tension between TTRPG document as a work of for aesthetic pleasure, like a work of like writerly art, and also as a reference manual for quick reference at the table, like an instruction manual, right? Where in many ways the prose stylings that we enjoy reading for pleasure don't necessarily lend themselves as well to like quick and easy grokability quickly at the table to know what the rules are. So I kind of like want to ask you your philosophy on like, do you feel that tension yourself as not necessarily a writer, but also as a reader of role-playing games? Like, do you feel like that tension between, oh, I kind of wish this was better written, more nicely written, or something where it's really nicely written, but then you're like, I kind of wish it was a little plainer written so I could just get that. And then how you navigate that as a reader. So that's the first question, like that philosophical thing. And then the second one is, since you are clearly someone who enjoys writing, what writers do you think influence your prose style in Twilight Country?
Okay, cool. Yeah. So, I'm actually gonna answer the second one first. With a little bit of a curveball. I don't regularly like read literature or write outside of RPGs.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my writing style actually comes from me writing more flowery, longer, for page constraints and and layout constraints.
Yeah.
It was a point of friendly contention between me and the layout artist Luna P. She's great, amazing work, and on such like a tight deadline, she did an amazing job.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like a friendly point of contention where it was like, okay, we need to find a way to get this cool prose to fit in this space, you know. So funny enough, a lot of the prose and writing that I consume is not literature. It is from video games. Disco Elysium's a big inspiration for me as well. It manifests very differently in Twilight Country than it does in Midnight in a Perfect World, but it is an inspiration. I didn't list it because it was a little bit distant from like I didn't list it in the book because it's a little bit distant from this product, but Disco Elysium is an inspiration. I also tried to read some Cormac McCarthy while I was making this game, and I say tried because I got about halfway through one of his books and I was like, okay, I understand the choices he's making as a writer, but it's too much and nothing's happening. So
Blood Meridian or which one?
Yeah, Blood Meridian. So I put down Blood Meridian because I really liked the prose, but didn't feel like the plot was going anywhere. So a lot of the prose actually comes from me and have my own frustrations with Blood Meridian and being like, okay, how do I shape this for my own game? But also things like Citizen Sleeper, another really good game. That's kind of like a book, like Disco Elysium. Those two were both really big inspirations, but also for some of the more like ephemeral paranormal parts of the prose, Twin Peaks, the TV show, was a really big inspiration. My girlfriend and I were binge watching the whole series. We have like a box set DVD set for it. And we watched the whole series over the course as I was working on Twilight Country. And that interjected with the classic horror films I was watching and the old 60s westerns and the newer, like as I would call them, neo-westerns, not in their setting, but when they were released in real time, like things like Ballad of Buster Scruggs or 1995's Dead Man. Great movie. I highly recommend Dead Man to anyone who likes westerns. Those were all inspirations. So what's funny is I don't really consider myself a writer. But my prose shines through from a whole bunch of different disparate sources.
Mm.
Remind me of what the first part of the question was, because I'm gonna just full disclosure. I am a little bit of a flake, and sometimes I get caught up in answering something. So I want to hear what was the first part again.
Before I tell you, Blood Meridian's plot is definitely going somewhere, and where it's going is hell.
True. Yeah, that is true. I got inklings of that, but it didn't catch me. It didn't hold me.
No, I can see that. I can see that. But the first question was kind of like, where do you see yourself in terms of, as a reader and as a writer, in the tension between TTRPGs as things to read for pleasure, so it should be nicely written, like you want nice sentences, and TTRPGs as rules reference manuals, where you want bullet points, you want to know what the thing is, you know?
Yeah. So in that respect, my philosophy is really simple. It's the game's manual should do two things. It should teach you how to play, and it should evoke the themes and setting that the players are playing in. The game does not need to do anything else. Everything else should not be in the book. And that mentality is kind of what led my choices for writing this game. Is I wanted to set the scene, set up the settings so people understand the kind of stories this game is meant to be told in, and then I said, okay, you understand? Now we're gonna go explain the rules. And because to me, I said earlier in this podcast, I want the game to be quick and to the point. I want the game to if it's too wordy and it doesn't have the information immediately the player needs, maybe it shouldn't be there. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of wiggle room there with the prose, but that's genuinely the guide that I follow. And so that's kind of what guided me for making Twilight Country's layout. and or not layout, writing. With the layout was informed by my communications with Luna while working on it.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Excellent. Well, let's look at our final questions. A couple of shout outs from the chat real quick. People really enjoyed that final round of questions, specifically that tension, Zoheb, that you had pulled out of the interfacing between prose and instruction and clarity. Michael Signal Station, who I think is one of the great tabletop writers of our day, it's talked about wrestling with that with Mike Martins, who is an excellent author in their own right, but also is a UX designer, and so has a very tendency to do a lot of clean stuff. I love when Michael and I love when they each do things individually. I love when they collaborate. Also, too, it's made some of the best writing that we've seen. They both worked on With Sailing of Claus Manor, which I think you can see that tension on display in really great ways. It comes together. Mike just also put out Tourist Hole. Trophy is a different thing that Mike works in. Tourist Hole, which is doing some really interesting things with prose in regards to layout, but also with prose in regards to, well, maybe I'm actually not going to tell you exactly what this game is about. Maybe the figuring out of this game is part of the play of this game. Tourist Hole is super light, really cool. They're all over on the +1 site, along with these two great games. You can go over there and check them out. That said, we've got 3 questions we always want to ask at the end, just to give you all a chance to kind of do some final commentary on each other's work. The first one is, what is one small thing, and this could be a word, a couple of phrases, a concept, a picture, but what's one thing that stood out to you from the other person's work, specifically? Zoheb, let's start with you. What's something that's small that stood out to you from Twilight Country?
Yeah, okay. I'm trying to find it. Give me a second.
Yeah.
Well, the nice thing about not having a physical copy is that I can do Ctrl+F.
Right. Me earlier.
Okay, no, I'm having. Oh, no, okay. Yeah, give me a second. Yes, okay. Here we are. The Helionic, the one of the traits that you can get for diamonds, the Jack. That one stood out to me. Like, you're reading through, right, various traits: underdog, gambler, academic. Some of the other ones from before, the face cards, yeah, they could get quite spicy, but Dustable, and all that. But then Helionic just like jumped out at me as like cool. That just jumped out at me. And I just want to know, like, where did that one come from?
Okay, so you have a very good eye, because that is actually one of the traits that we play tested with really early on, and it became the centerpiece of a multi-part playtesting session, like a centerpiece of the plot. So good eye, first of all. But Helionic, Helionic is kind of inspired by the Immolator class in that was added as a like sort of like a expansion for Dungeon World. Because Dungeon World was, I mean, other things aside, but Dungeon World was one of the first indie TTRPGs that I got into. That and Sleepaway by Jay Dragon were like my 2 first games in the indie space. And I really liked the idea of the Helionic and how fire represents like burning away like personal bonds in Dungeon World, but also I liked the idea of how fire is often used to evoke themes of cleansing, or oftentimes in westerns is often used as a theme for torture and cruelty, especially with like a cow iron. But that trait was actually suggested by one of my friends, so I put in special thanks, who play tested the game, Michael Perothers. He is a really good writer, and is also has a background in in history and Shakespeare. And when we were drafting up like the ideas for the traits, I was like, okay, I'm running out of ideas for these um for the like the spicier traits, the face card traits. And I was telling them like, oh, I have something for the moon, and I kind of want something for the sun, but I don't want it to be about the typical things about the sun. And I had recently just saw The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly has a whole scene where they use dehydration in the desert as a form of torture. And I was explaining this to my friends, and Michael chimed in and said, what if you had a trait where you could just burn things, and we can see how powerful, how crazy it gets in this system. And I was like, yeah, let's try it. So we put Helionic in, and it worked with flying colors. That was a really fun one. So yeah, no, good eye. Yeah.
What about you, Mike? What's something that stood out from Midnight in a Perfect World to you?
Oh, okay. So I really liked. I don't know if this is necessarily a question, but maybe you have some extra insight, but about this. But I really liked the guidelines that you include for each phase of the dinner party. I really liked specifically the arc that is kind of structured into the book of having the tension simmer, boil over, and then have people try and like consolidate and reconcile is the word, their the arguments, and like even the suggestion of like you can have your character leave the room and go smoke outside. That I really like that detail, because to me it was like, wow, this guy really gets family drama. This guy really gets the moments where people who love each other are like, I need some space from you, and I thought that was really cool, that little snippet about how a character might leave the scene and go smoke outside, which, because you said it's sort of like, this game is sort of like a LARP. The player literally goes and does that. They go sit outside. And it just got my gears turning about like, oh, like you could have like another player go follow them out and talk to them about the conversation they had, and it could lead to a heart to heart that's just for them, and it could emerge in the like the final part of the game when the ghosts like imprint on the setting. And I thought that was fantastic. So I mean, if you have any other insights about that, like that kind of structure, go ahead, because it's not really a question that's not really like a question like structure as a question, but yeah, that's what stuck out to me.
Yeah, thank you for that. It was something that I was, no comment on the family thing. I'm heading back to Bangladesh for my cousin's wedding next month. Jesus Christ. Anyway, but so a lot of it was kind of like me imagining like the kinds of like things that could be done in this sort of situation, where the idea is that you can be really emotional in character, but you have to have like safety valves. And I felt like suggesting that you could literally just go outside, you could take a walk, and that doesn't ruin the game. That's you expressing, that's you giving your character some space to detox. Maybe you need some space to detox as well, without it ruining or being like, oh, should we take a break? Should we pause the game? Stuff like that I think was important, because I am someone who, I like the idea of like really fractious, like really intense role playing. I like the idea of it, but I don't know, maybe I get to bleed too easily, or I'm a little bit of a coward, or I'm just kind of like a people pleaser or whatever. I tend to be quite uncomfortable when like things are getting quite heated, right? So in a sense like that, those elements are for a different kind of player than I actually am, which I think is always ironic when you're writing a game. But I know a lot of people who like those sorts of mechanics. The other thing that I want to reflect on is that I am someone, because I've been moving from country to country for a long time, it's really difficult to find like Anglophone RPG groups for me, especially ones that aren't just playing D&D. And where I'm currently now, that even that's hard to find. So I've been playing online. The pandemic, as I mentioned, this was a big part of like when I started playing. So Midnight in a Perfect World was playtested online, which was interesting to think about because it's also structured and written in such a way that you can physically sit together at a table and play it. And that might be the purest form of its play. But because I did it online, and when you're doing it on a Discord call, everyone, you can't really have like multiple conversations happening at the same time. When someone's speaking, they're spotlit and they get to monologue. They have a conversation with someone else, but they get to speak, right? And it was really interesting because last week I managed to get an IRL table with people from my university together. And we were all in a table and there were like multiple people talking to each other at the same time and trying to also follow each other's conversations. And that was really interesting to me because my one of the players, my supervisor afterwards actually complained, Zoheb, I wish that I could listen to all the conversations at once. And I said, well, maybe you should be playing on Discord then. But even the format, like, are you playing online? Are you playing physically? Structure changes even something as basic as how many conversations are happening at the same time, how many plot threads are happening in parallel, right? Which I think, comes down to like how different it is to be able to be in a space and then like take physical actions as well.
That's really cool. When I read your book, I thought this game is played only in person, and the conversations splitting and people not getting the full breadth of the dinner party was part of the game. So that's really interesting to hear that was actually playtested originally on Discord. That's crazy. That's really cool. I didn't expect that at all. That's cool. That's a curveball,
huh? Mike, let's start with you this time. What's one thing that would have been different if you had created the game? If you had created Midnight in a Perfect World, what's either a signature move or something you would have done to it that would have made it substantively different? If you had been the designer.
Oh, geez. See, my instinct is to create tools to help people get into character, and you do it in a much more elegant way than I would have. But what I would have probably done is create very simple little like archetypes of either family dynamic or background that the players can pick up and toy with to get them in the headspace. But the way you did it of asking each player next to you about their character, I think is more elegant. But I also want to comment that I would not have been able to make this game. I don't have the shared experience to do. I know this is hypothetical. I know
it's a good call out. It's a good awareness, but it's also, I mean, like, it's why we only ask you for one thing that you would do differently, not to
of course.
the game.
But the perspective, as someone who is admittedly like middle class in a colonial superpower and living in the United States, and I'm fairly young as well. I don't have that perspective, So I would have approached this style of game in a completely different way that I think would be less true to that experience. But if I were to choose anything and tweak it in my own style, it would probably be changing the character creation just a little bit to have those pick up and play systems, even though I like the way you concluded it better than that.
Yeah. So same question for you. If you had designed Twilight Country, what was one thing you would have done differently?
Yeah. I think the answer is easy. I would have included a fucked up little bestiary.
Yeah.
I nothing to elaborate on that further. I just like writing weird little guys, and I think this would be a really good opportunity to write weird little guys.
I mean, like I said, there's always second edition with the Zoheb fucked up little bestiary is a good add-on.
I actually did consider writing some kind of sample monsters in the game, but I cut it in favor of a questionnaire for designing the monster because I wanted people to think of the fear or the insecurity they wanted to they wanted to spotlight first and then build a monster around it.
Mhm.
And the other reason I didn't do it is because the game is so lightweight on stats. I was like, what am I gonna write? What special powers am I gonna write for these creatures? So I decided, especially for a game of this scope, for my first Zine game, it'd be better to just have a questionnaire for making your own monsters. But yeah, no, if I were to make a second edition, I also would have a bestiary of fucked up guys.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think your answer kind of like reminds me of like why I didn't like do more with the character creation. And yeah, I have like certain like there's some political resonances and so on to like keeping things open-ended and so on. Fundamentally, the answer comes down to the fact that I felt lazy and I didn't feel like I needed to do it. That's the answer there. And I think like that's not a cop-out, right? You know, games are finite objects. You have to finish writing at some point. Either you want to publish it or you want to kind of like put it out there, see how it actually works out in the market and all that. You can't
Yeah.
work on something forever. There's just so much you can write, right? So the best way, I think, also comes down to that. You came up with a system for like devising it for people on their own, like rather than you telling it. So I think that makes sense. But also to briefly comment on the lack of personal experience and so on, there's like, I have a friend called Saumitri who's Indian, and he has some incredible quotes that always like make me think about like politics, history, issues of like cross-cultural communication, especially with like, you know, differences in, I guess, like our country's geopolitical powers and stances and all that. And he likes to quote a Tamil poet called A.K. Ramanujan, who has a longer quote, but like the part that I really like, which I would like everyone to kind of like take home, as it were, is that nothing human is alien, right? It doesn't really matter which country you're from, like what your personal background and so on is. Everything is understandable, everything is grokkable. You have your own personal like experiences and your own personal like ways into something, right? And that's something that I try to struggle a lot with because I, you know, live abroad. I don't live in Bangladesh. I play RPGs online. It's a very Anglophone, Americanized hobby, right? So how to communicate ideas across that cultural barrier while myself becoming someone who's like increasingly hybridized, right? And it's really important for me to like kind of remember that the idea is to kind of like get across universal humanity versus thinking in terms of like, this is only for brown people, this is only for people from the global south and so on. If you're American, don't play this and all that. Always bear it in mind, but like, you know, figuring it out. So Twilight Country, a game about the American West, there's something in there for me, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just me thinking.
No, I mean, yeah, I think it's great. It's always really interesting when that conversation comes up. So we had some really good ones on it on stream. Like there is a level of cultural consciousness that exists within the US that is simultaneously helpful and also misses oftentimes even the Americanism as a primary privilege more so than some other types of lived experience. Too, but I also, except like for my cultural and spiritual background, like the understanding of like nothing that is human is alien to me. Like there's so much resonance in that. It's such a beautiful like quote to pull out. I'll see if I can find the larger body and that later on. So if you're watching this later, check it out in the show notes. Last question is what's something you never would have thought to include if you had created this game? Again, this could be big, small, something you noted that just really kind of surprised you as it hit
you. I think I'll start. I think, yeah, I mean, I've already brought up the challenge hand, but that mechanic kind of like blew my mind because, again, maybe it's just simply because I don't think in terms of cards and cards make my brain hurt, but like it was so intricate for me and so well done. And again, you were talking about like how you weren't super sure about the mechanic and how it was balanced and so on. And I think partly that is that the uncertainty of all these cards and like what actually happens made it hard for me to kind of like put my head around. And I really liked like going for something where you don't know if it's balanced or not as a designer because it's so uncertain, right? But I've already talked about the challenge, and so I won't bring it up beyond just congratulating you on that again and saying that if I hadn't brought it up before, this would be my answer. So my actual answer to this question, because I've picked something else, is the fact that when you get shot, you just die, right?
Yeah.
That's Western, makes sense. That's
Yep.
horror, makes sense. But it's so ballsy, it's so pure, it's so beautiful as a rule. I love that.
Thank you. Yeah. That honestly just came from my observations of horror and Western media and being like, wait a minute, these two have this thing in common, where the character gets stabbed or shot or something terrible happens to them and they're lying face down in the dirt and you don't know that they're okay until you flip them over. And in a horror movie, you flip them over and they're a zombie. If in a Western movie, you flip them over and they're wearing an old cast iron pan and they actually survived the shot. Stuff like that.
Now that you mentioned that part, because I had forgotten that you have the mechanic where you like have the card and you don't know what it says, right?
Yep.
Like, is Mothership an inspiration for you?
Huh?
Is the game Mothership an inspiration for you?
Yes.
Yeah.
I read through Mothership
right?
and was like, okay, this is a really cool system, but and I want to grab just this little piece because this fits perfectly for what I'm going for. And I like using the cards more than using dice. And the reason why is dice are just a random number generator as a geometric shape. Cards can be shuffled, they can be dealt, they can be face up or face down, and they have features other than their number. They have suits and they have color, and they have order as well. You can mess with the order. So there's a lot of things with cards that like you said earlier in this interview, more levers to pull. And that's why I opted for cards, not just because of the theme. Not just because of the theme, but because the cards are they have more you can do with them and than just being a random number generator. And that's one of the main reasons why I chose the cards as well, is because you can have a hand of cards. You can't have a hand of dice. And a hand of cards forces choice. So yeah, that and the getting shot rule, the challenge hand and getting shot rule are like the two things I'm very proud of for that. So the good choices. I agree with you on my own work for that one.
And Mike, how about you? What's something that you could have stared at the concept on a page for years and never have come up with about Midnight in a Perfect World?
Well, the first thing I want to say is I am one of those people who overlooked the idea of using a live timer in a game. So right off the bat, I wouldn't have done that. Because I don't think about stuff like that. But the other thing, that I would have never thought to do is, set the game as a dinner party. I know that sounds kind of weird and a little bit of a cop-out because that's what the game's about. But no, really, the idea of a dinner party setting, in most tabletop RPGs is typically used as a prelude before the real main event. Like in horror, it's the dinner party and then something happens and then everyone's stuck in the mansion together. Or it's a murder mystery, dinner party, someone dies, have to go solve the murder, right? The dinner party is never the centerpiece of a setting, but in this game, it is. And I think that's something I didn't consider. I always considered the dinner party as the answer to the question, why are we all here? Not the dinner party literally being the story. So that's something I would have never thought to do, is using a dinner party.
Yeah. No, and in a sense, it's within the fiction of the world, it is also the prelude, right? What's actually happening is midnight, the big celebration, right? There's dinner parties and other things and so on, the countdown. And in a sense, that's not important, except that we decide to actually tell the story and look at this thing that is not otherwise important. The fate of the nation is not hanging in the balance in this conversation, probably, unless your game goes in that direction. You do you, right? It's just people, right? Yeah, if you're going to have the timer, if you're going to have 3 hours and so on, which seemed right, what are people doing? I guess they could be a pre-game drinks, as it were. People could be drinking, I guess, but that doesn't feel right for a TTRPG concept. Big drinking party, everyone getting smashed before going there. You can get smashed. There's a alcohol rule in the game. Beyond that, I don't know. Bangladeshi culture is really based around dinner parties, everyone getting together. definitely more than 4 people. In that context. So there's that. I really love dinner parties. I love having my friends over, having bottles of wine and so on, beer, just talking late into the night. A dinner party that ends where everyone's stumbling home around like 3 a.m. is for me like the height of success. I just love those. But I think like it also comes down to something that I've been thinking about, especially since playing it last week with my colleagues, which is that there's a lot of assumptions in the game that I've kind of like made explicit, like it's a national revolution, it's been a certain number of years, blah, blah, blah. There's certain things that are hard coded. One of the things that's like implicit, which I realized that I didn't actually make explicit, and which I'm not now reflecting as a flaw, which is something that I've thought about, is that it's a very bourgeois sort of fantasy, right? It's very middle class, right? Which isn't to say working class people don't have dinner parties and so on, but like this sort of vibe for me feels so much like a group of middle class survivors and all that. And I think that's something to lean into, not lean away from if you're playing this game. Just another little thing that struck me, which I'd written this game, thought about it, and hadn't realized my middle class assumptions coming in to the system.
Love it. Well, I want to thank both of you for taking time to not only come up with the questions, but also share your ideas, reflect on your own design experiences and someone else's. It's been great to have y'all here. Loved having chat with us also too. People deeply enjoyed a lot of the topics that y'all hit on. And really, like I said, this is the more we do this, the more excited I get, because being able to sit down and talk about a Weird West horror game and a game about revolution and what it cost us, like those don't also always initially seem to jive together, but as we get into the conversation, we can see how different themes emerge, how they connect, how different people approach things, a different material within similar ways, but with their own unique human perspective brought to it. So thanks to each of you for being here and being a part of the conversation on this month's Now You've Seen It. You can get either of these two games over on plus1exp.com. If you're a member of Zine Club, you've already got them. If you're not a member of Zine Club, go to rpgzine.club to check them out. Tourist Hole with Sailing of Claus Manor that I mentioned are also over on the site. If it's your first time placing an order with us, sign up for our email list, get 5% off. We did this a day early for a couple reasons, but one of them is we'll be at PAX this weekend. So if you're around, come by booth 4143 or catch us in the Games on Demand room, running a lot of games over the course of the weekend at our Friday night takeover, or just in the evening. I'm already here in Philadelphia because it's where I live, but we're excited to host everyone who's coming in for it. If you can't join us, we hope that you'll join us at PAX. We hope you'll join us next time we're here live on stream. Zoheb, real quick, if people want to find you, find out more about your design, check on the other work that you do, what's the best way for them to do that?
Before I do that, I wanted to bring up one last thing that we didn't talk about at all, which now is a great opportunity to do so. Our games have very similar names.
They do.
Yes. Yeah, I remember you made a joke about that on Blue Sky. I remember seeing that. Now that got me a chuckle.
They do, in the sense that even if you swapped the names, we could theoretically be talking about either game. I think you picked I think each one has the right name, but it is really funny that they're always like I said, there's always those little people will be like, did y'all plan that? And I'm like, I wish we could be that cool. Wes does plan some of that stuff out, but a lot of times it's like, I wish we could be that cool. We're not. And so yeah, lots of times Wes will play for thematic resonance. But yeah, if people want to find your work, where can they do that?
Yeah, so you can find my games at on itch. So at klowspeaking.itch.io. So KLOW speaking at itch. Midnight, or you can just search Midnight in a Perfect World at itch.io. It's also on there. Aside from getting it on the +1 store, which I recommend because then you can get a print copy, which is lovely. It looks really nice. You've been seeing it on Mike's stream. As for where else you can find me, I do a podcast, an actual play podcast with my friends. It's called Desperate Attune. If you are Blades in the Dark fans, you'll guess the reference. It started off as a Blades in the Dark, sort of like a fan podcast, but with a South Asian sort of twist. We are currently getting together season 3, which is actually going to be Apocalypse World Burned Over, which is currently on Kickstarter, which we did not expect to be the case when we started recording this earlier this year. So there's a little bit of resonance there. If you are curious about Burned Over, if you want to support that Kickstarter, which you should, wonderful, right? You know, Apocalypse World tradition. I want to see it in play. We'll soon have that for you.
Awesome. And I'm dropping links to all those things, including Apocalypse World Burned Over, because if you haven't backed it, you absolutely should.
You should.
Into the chat right now. We'll have Quinn link those up later as well. Mike, if people want to find you, find more about your work, what's the best place to do that?
Yeah, best places, Blue Sky and Tumblr, both on Fort of Novelty. Fort of Novelty is I post both just like about like things going on in like games I'm interested in and funny stuff I find, and also updates about my games. Other than that, you can also, if you stay tuned with Plus One EXP, I already have another game in the works. The title is Absurdonauts, and if you are going to PAX Unplugged, you can try it out in its like I would say like a prototype state at Games on Demand. So if you're going to PAX U, you can find me there. Yeah, Fort of Novelty on Blue Sky and on Tumblr.
Awesome. Super excited. Please go out and follow both of these great creators. Check out their work. I have not had a chance to dive into a tune yet, but I have been super excited to do so and have some free time coming up over the holidays where I'm looking forward to enjoying it. But until next time, now you've seen us and now you don't. We'll talk to everybody later. Thanks everyone for tuning in.